Julian had two homes, two beds, two toothbrushes, two versions of himself, but not a single place where he could breathe all the way in. At his mother's house, he was Julian neat, attentive, always in line. He answered questions with "yes, ma'am," folded his laundry without asking, and never left dishes in the sink. The air was full of rules and expectations, but at least it was warm. At his father's apartment, he became Jules' quiet, invisible, a body in a borrowed room with a fridge full of expired food and a couch always slightly damp. There were no questions, no dinners, no curfews, just silence. Not peaceful silence, the kind that made you forget what your voice sounded like. His parents divorced when he was a child. Ever since, life had been a series of drop-offs and pickups, suitcases that never fully unpacked, and the echo of two adults who talked about him but never with him. It wasn't just the homes that were divided. He was, too. He didn't mind the shifting at first. But once he realized he was gay, everything split deeper. At his mom's, he became careful overcorrecting the way he walked, lowering the tone of his voice, avoiding questions like, "Do you have a girlfriend yet?" She wasn't cruel, but she was tense. The way she snatched a magazine from him when he lingered too long on a male model. The way she smiled too quickly when he said he was just busy on prom night. At his dad's, things were worse. He once laughed too freely, and his father stopped mid-chew to glance up and say nothing. Nothing but the kind of nothing that shrinks you. Jules learned to sit straighter, say less, and hide better. Each visit reset him. He never dared to come out. By the time he was applying for college, the form asked who to list for emergency contact. Julian stared at the blinking cursor. Not his mother, she would panic. Not his father, he wouldn't answer. Who do you put down when your only safety has been pretending? He felt like a guest in every version of his life. Not a son, not a person. Just a quiet presence passed back and forth like a package with no return address. But that year, something cracked. He started drawing again, something he hadn't done since he was 12. It began with two faceless figures, one dressed in pressed collars, the other in hoodies and scuffed sneakers. He gave them matching eyes. His eyes. He began to wonder what it would look like to draw the person in between. This is the story of how he did, and how the world saw him for the first time, exactly as he was. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to support Heart Stories by subscribing. Your voice helps us amplify others. Julian didn't expect anyone to care. He uploaded the post at midnight, with no hashtags, no filter, no campaign behind it. Just two AI-generated characters, both versions of himself staring at each other across a dimly lit hallway. He captioned it with a single line, "I lived as two boys for years. I'm still trying to find the third one." Then he turned off his phone and went to bed. The next morning, he had over 800 notifications. By the end of the week, his drawings had been shared by therapists, youth counselors, LGBTQ+ creators, and total strangers who tagged him in comments like, "I feel seen," or "This is exactly what it felt like growing up split." One message stood out. It came from a 17-year-old in Kentucky. The boy wrote, "My parents just told me I'm going to a conversion program. I thought I had to choose either be myself or keep my family. But your post makes me want to believe there's a third door. One I get to build." Julian read it 5 times. That night, he cried harder than he had in years. Not because he was Shem, but because for the first time when his pain had reached someone else's edge and softened it. He kept drawing. The two versions of himself became characters in small comic panels. He named them Poe and Silence. Rule kept journals and smiled through tension. Silence always looked out the window, waiting for a place to arrive that never came. Then came an email. A director named Mace, who ran a small animation studio known for emotionally driven short films, had seen the post. Mace wrote, "You don't know me, but I know this story. I'd like to help you tell it in a way the world can't scroll past. Would you be open to making this into a short film? You'll write. We'll bring it to life." Julian stared at the message for hours before replying. He didn't ask about the budget. He didn't send references. He just wrote, "I've always wanted someone to see both boys at once and not look away." The project moved quickly. Mace was precise but patient. Julian submitted scripts, sketches, even voiceover drafts he recorded alone in his closet, beneath a quilt to muffle the sound. But something was missing. The characters moved well. The writing landed, but the visuals, the soul felt flat. Mace agreed, "We need someone who knows how to draw what isn't being said," he said one day. A week later, Mace sent Julian a new email. "I've invited a senior visual artist to join the project. He's old school, doesn't do video calls, but I've worked with him once. He draws like he's seen people hiding in plain sight." The artist would only go by one name, Harlan. Julian didn't recognize it, but something in his chest tightened anyway. He opened the first sketch Harlan submitted. Two figures, clearly rule in silence, stood inside an unfinished room. No faces, no mouths. Only posture, shoulders curled, knees turned slightly inward. Between them was a pair of shoes-tattered canvas sneakers. The soles worn so thin, you could almost see through them. Julian dropped his phone. He knew those shoes. He left them at his father's place 3 years ago, after a fight that ended with slammed doors and silence that lasted longer than words ever could. No one had seen them since. Not his mother, not even his friends. No one except his father. Julian stared at the screen for a long time. The shoes in Harlan's drawing weren't generic. They weren't stock references pulled from the internet. The laces were frayed in the same place Julian used to bite when he was anxious. The left sole was more worn than the right because he always dragged one foot. And there, faint but deliberate, was the stitching on the heel where his mother had patched a tear with navy thread. These weren't just any shoes, these were his shoes. The ones he left behind at his father's door. After a night where words failed and exits spoke louder. That was the last night Julian visited. He'd never asked about them, never brought them up. He assumed they were thrown out or forgotten, but here they were, immortalized in graphite, caught between two silent boys in a room with no doors. Julian didn't confront Mace. Not yet. He wanted to be sure. Over the next few weeks, more sketches arrived. Harlan never wrote notes. He never joined meetings, just sent folders titled things like Light Between Frames or Weight of Quiet. Each drawing carried emotional weight Julian couldn't explain. One showed rule and silence standing on either side of a chalkboard, one drawing constellations, the other erasing them with bare hands. Another had them sitting on opposite ends of a bench, a pride flag made of yarn dangling between them, tied to both wrists like a thread neither could cut. Julian felt something strange in his chest, a mix of recognition and grief. This artist, whoever he was, understood him, not in the loud, supportive way his teachers sometimes tried to offer, not in the cautious, overcorrecting tone his mother used when saying, "It's okay if you're different." This felt quieter, older, as if the drawings weren't trying to fix him, but to reflect him. Late one night, Julian reopened a box from his childhood closet. Inside were old report cards, dried markers, a crumpled drawing from second grade, a dragon in a bow tie. Beneath it all, he found a sketchbook he hadn't touched in years. On the inside cover, written in messy block letters, was a name he hadn't thought about in so long, Harlan. His father's old art name. Julian remembered now. When he was little, his dad used to doodle on grocery lists, napkins, scraps of mail. He called himself Harlan as a joke, said it sounded like someone who mattered. Julian hadn't seen him draw in over a decade. He felt sick and small and suddenly exposed. He opened his email and typed, "Is Harlan my dad?" He deleted it, then rewrote it, then deleted it again. He didn't want an answer, not directly. Instead, he replied to Mace's last message with a single sentence. "Whoever he is, tell him the shoes are still mine." No reply came, but a week later, a new drawing arrived. This one showed the two characters sitting side by side on a floor, backs leaning against the same wall, no longer facing each other. Between them lay a single sketchbook, open, shared. No faces, just hands, one old, one young. And at the bottom of the page, barely visible, a line of text: some truths take years to say, some are drawn in silence. Julian didn't cry. He just sat there, breathing for once, like all the air belonged to him. Julian never got a message from Harlan. Not a thank you, not a confession, not even a glad you saw the shoes. But the drawings kept coming. One showed Rule and Silence sitting in a car, both looking out opposite windows while the road behind them curled into a spiral. Another had them holding the same umbrella in a downpour, one keeping dry, the other soaked but still standing beside him. Julian studied every line, every stroke. And though not a single word passed between them, he understood more with each image. This wasn't a father who came back with flowers. This wasn't an apology wrapped in a hug. It was something else, a kind of penance made with hands and paper, a quiet offering that said, I don't know how to speak your language, but I'm here, still drawing. Julian didn't reply. He didn't need to. The drawings were their dialogue now. Meanwhile, his mother finally caught wind of the project's momentum. One afternoon, she sent him a voice message, her tone brittle under forced warmth. I saw that your story is being shared a lot. That's wonderful. I just hope people understand that I was always there for you, that I supported you. I cooked for you. I helped with school. I only wanted what was best. She didn't mention the day she told him to stop walking like that when he was 12, or the way she lowered her voice anytime he mentioned a boy's name, or how she used to say, it's okay if you turn out different, as if he were still a work in progress to fix. Julian didn't respond. He didn't hate her, but he wasn't going to shrink himself to make her feel bigger. In the animation studio, production entered its final stages. Julian narrated the script himself, something Mace insisted on. No one else can carry your voice like you do. The team worked around the clock. Voice actors, sound mixers, background artists. But one person remained unseen: Harlan. He never visited the studio, never joined a single group call. His files arrived like clockwork. Named things like Shadows That Stay or Frame 83, Watch the Hands. And yet, somehow, his presence loomed over everything. In one of the final sequences, he'd drawn Rule and Silence standing beneath a ceiling light that flickered between warm and cold. They weren't talking, just looking at a photograph on the wall. The photo was blank, no frame, no subject, just light. Julian stared at that sketch for hours. Something about it felt like closure without a lock. Not an ending, not even a new beginning, but the space in between. The first breath after too many held in. He sent one last email to Mace. Tell him, I don't need him to explain anything, but if he's still got those shoes, I hope they didn't collect too much dust. Mace replied the next day. No text, just a photo. It was a pair of canvas sneakers, frayed, faded, soft with years, placed neatly beside a drawing board, under a small window where late sunlight pooled in like forgiveness. Julian didn't save the image. He didn't need to. He'd been carrying those shoes in his memory for so long that now finally they could rest. The theater wasn't large, just a modest screening room with folding chairs and scuffed floors. The kind of place where stories were told without fireworks. The walls held no posters. The lights dimmed without fanfare. But every seat was taken. Julian sat in the front row, knees bouncing, hands clenched. This wasn't just a film. This was the room where his two selves, Julian and Jules, would finally meet. Where silence and rule following, fear and softness, everything he'd spent his life separating, would be seen together without apology. The film opened the way his post once had. Two boys, same eyes, different lives. The room held its breath as they moved through parallel worlds, brushing past each other but never quite touching. Until, in the final scene, they stood in a bare room, his room with nothing between them but a pair of worn-out shoes, and a beam of light that hit both faces at once. The crowd didn't cheer, not right away. They exhaled, then rose to their feet. Julian was invited to speak, but his voice trembled as he reached the microphone. He didn't rehearse a speech. He didn't bring notes. He just looked out into the sea of people, strangers, students, a few teachers, a boy from Kentucky who flew in with his aunt, and somewhere into the back, one empty seat, no name on it, but he knew who hadn't come. I used to think I had to choose who I was, Julian said softly. One house, one version of me, one way to walk, speak, feel, but it turns out we don't have to pick a side. We don't have to fold ourselves to fit where we were left. He paused, eyes burning. I'm not rule. I'm not silence. I'm both. And I'm neither. I'm the frame in between. And that's enough. Applause came like a tide. Some people cried, others clapped with both hands in the air. Julian walked off stage slowly. Outside the theater, under a flickering street lamp, Mace waited with a small envelope. He didn't speak, just handed it to Julian and nodded once. Inside was a final sketch, black ink on cream paper. It showed a single boy sitting cross-legged, sketchbook open on his lap. Behind him, on the wall, hung two framed drawings. One showed rule in his pressed collar, the other, silence in his worn hoodie, and in the middle, a blank frame labeled, Now. On the bottom right corner was a note, scrawled in rough, familiar handwriting, if you ever need someone to keep the lights steady for your next drawing. I'll be here. You don't have to look back. Just draw forward. Julian didn't write back, but that night he packed his bags, not to return to his mother's house, not to knock on his father's door, but to move in with three friends, each of them queer, each carrying stories with jagged edges and quiet triumphs. They turned a small apartment into a space full of light, mismatched furniture, and homemade food. Together, they started a project called Frame 3, a digital studio, a space for LGBTQ+ youth to tell their stories in animation, illustration, and sound. No apologies, no edits, no expectations to explain, just the truth, in whatever form it took. Julian's shoes sat by the door, not as relics, not as scars, but as proof he had walked this far and didn't need to walk back. So tell us, if you've ever lived between two versions of yourself, which part of you are you ready to draw next? If this story moved you, even just a little, we invite you to join us at Heart Stories. Subscribe, share, or simply stay, because some days being seen is the beginning of becoming whole.